My name is Odessa Clark, and the night my father cut off my voice in front of an entire crowd is burned into me like a scar that will never fade. I stood there, heart pounding, ready to honor the scholarship fund my late mother built, the one meant to carry her name forward. I opened my mouth to speak, but before a single sentence left me, my father's hand slammed the mute button. The microphone went dead. His smile was wide, polished, and fake as he waved me aside and told the audience, "This isn't the time for her little stories." In that moment, I wasn't his daughter. I was an inconvenience, a shadow he needed to silence. The laughter that followed sliced deeper than any blade. And the humiliation didn't just bruise me, it split something open inside. That was the night I realized my father would rather erase me than let me be heard. And it was also the night I learned that sometimes the only way to reclaim your voice is to let the world hear it louder than he ever imagined. And that Friday night in San Diego still lives inside me like a wound that refuses to close. The pier was strung with lights, a soft glow against the water, and hundreds of people crowded around the stage where my father, local talk radio host, master of ceremonies, self-proclaimed man of the community, held court. Behind him, a massive American flag rippled in the night breeze, its edges lit by the floodlamps. When the speeches slowed and the band paused, I rose from my seat. My palms were damp, but my chest was steady. This was the first fundraising gala since my mother's death, and the scholarship fund that bore her name deserved to be honored. I only wanted to thank those who had given so much in her memory. I stepped up to the microphone. The hum of the speakers warmed as I leaned in. "I just want to say..." Before my second word, there was a sharp click. The mic went dead. My father's hand was already on the control board, his smile wide and smooth as if nothing had happened. He raised his arm, signaling the band. Trumpets blared to life, drowning me out. He turned to the crowd, laughing into his own mic. "Not tonight, folks. This isn't the time for her little stories." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the audience. Others shifted in their seats, eyes darting between us. I stood frozen, the silence inside me louder than the music that crushed my voice. The flag snapped behind us in the breeze. The smell of salt water stung my nose, and my father never once looked at me. I swallowed hard and forced myself back to my seat. My chest burned with humiliation, but I kept my face composed. I would not let him see me crack. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down. A single message glowed across the screen. USS Midway. ZU 900, Sunday. Uniform B. Pow! For a moment, the music and the laughter faded. Something else waited on the horizon. Something my father could not mute. The morning after the gala, I sat in my small rented room, staring at the framed photo of my mother on the nightstand. Her gentle smile seemed to cut deeper than the humiliation I had endured the night before. I could still hear my father's laugh echoing in my head, the way he dismissed me as if my voice had no place in his world. My mind drifted back to when I was 19. That was the year I told my father I had enlisted in the Navy. He stood in the kitchen, fists clenched, the smell of salt and boat oil filling the air. "You're throwing your life away," he shouted, his face red with fury. He wanted me to stay, to run the family's small marina business, to be the obedient daughter who carried his name. But I had already signed my papers. I wanted more than the docks, more than being tethered to a man who only measured worth in obedience. My mother never said much that day. She only placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes filled with something between fear and pride. When I shipped out for training, she slipped a folded piece of paper into my bag. I didn't open it then. I couldn't. Years later, after her funeral, I found that note again, now, as I pulled a wooden box from under my bed. The letter lay there, the ink slightly blurred from age, her handwriting slanted, delicate but firm. "Odessa, you are not leaving home. You are building one for yourself. And I name you as co-trustee of my scholarship fund. Never let your voice be silenced, not even by family." My throat tightened. For years, I believed my father alone controlled the scholarship in her name. I thought the money raised went to local students, keeping her legacy alive. But the accounts I had glimpsed told a different story. Funds siphoned into events and promotion that lined up a little too neatly with his radio shows. The betrayal wasn't just his dismissal of me anymore. He was tarnishing my mother's name, bending her gift into another tool for his ego. The anger swelled in my chest, but beneath it was something steadier. The realization that I had the legal and moral ground to fight back. I folded the letter carefully, slipping it into my jacket pocket as if it were armor. For the first time in years, I felt the faintest spark of hope. My father had always told me I walked away from home, but looking at my mother's words, I knew the truth. He was the one who had abandoned what mattered most. The next morning, the sky was still bruised with night when I walked along the bay. The sun edged over the horizon, laying streaks of gold across the rippling water. My thoughts churned, heavy and sharp. When my phone rang, I answered, expecting a wrong number. Instead, a trembling female voice spoke through tears. "Are you Odessa Clark?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm the mother of Petty Officer Ramirez," she whispered, sobbing. "He made it home because of you. They told me about the medical supplies flown in during the storm. He was on that line. He's alive because you didn't give up." Her words hit harder than the waves slapping against the pier. My throat closed, and I pressed a hand against the cold railing. I remembered that night, my team scrambling to coordinate logistics in the middle of chaos, the cargo planes we routed, the endless hours of radio calls. I hadn't known names, only numbers and pallets. To her, though, it was her son's life. "You saved him," she said again, voice breaking. "You don't know what that means to a mother." I could barely answer. The phone slipped from my sweaty palm, and I caught it just before it hit the concrete. Tears blurred the horizon. Then, another call came through, this time, a clipped official voice, a Navy public affairs officer. "Lieutenant Clark, you've been nominated for the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for your service during the storm. The recognition will take place Sunday morning at the USS Midway. Attendance is mandatory. Uniform B." "Ha!" The words echoed in my ears. I should have felt proud. And I did. Somewhere beneath the shock, pride rose like a tide, but layered over it was dread. My father would be there, standing in the spotlight he believed belonged only to him. The pier stretched out before me, endless and uncertain. My mother's words rested against my heart, and now the Navy's call waited on the horizon. Two voices pulling me forward, both louder than the man who had tried to silence me. At noon, I walked into a small credit union in San Diego, the kind with quiet counters and the clean smell of fresh paper. I handed the teller my mother's handwritten letter naming me co-trustee and asked for full statements on the scholarship fund. She studied the page, nodded, and disappeared into a back room. When she returned, she slid a stack of printouts across the counter, the paper warm under my fingers. Black text marched down white pages. Dates, vendors, memos. My eyes stalled on a column labeled Promotions Events, line after line. The totals climbed until they nearly matched what had been awarded to students. At the bottom of each withdrawal sat a neat signature I knew too well, my father's. The weight of the pages made my hands shake. "There must be an error," I said, though my voice made it sound like a question. The teller lowered her voice and glanced around. "I'm not allowed to comment, but Mrs. Vance, your mother, wouldn't be pleased." Tens of thousands sat where they didn't belong. The numbers were cold, but they burned. I stepped outside into the hard California sun and called my father. He picked up on the second ring. "Let's talk privately," I said. "I have the statements." His tone went smooth and public. "If you want to make things clear, come on my show. We'll let the whole city hear." He hung up before I could answer. The truth was finally on paper, and he wanted to turn it into a spectacle. The humiliation from the night before curdled into resolve. If he needed a stage, I would walk onto it and bring the ledger with me. The studio lights were low, but the red on-air bulb burned like a warning. A silver microphone gleamed in front of me, twin to the one at my father's chair. I set the statements on the desk and adjusted my headset. "I'm here to talk about the fund's accounting," I began. As co-trustee named by my mother's letter, A soft click, then silence. My father had flicked the mute. He leaned toward the camera for the live stream, smile lacquered. "She ran away from home for the military, and now she wants to come back and grab power." In my headphones, only music swelled, not my voice. I swallowed, tried again. The trust bar's PR spending, the statements show. Another click, another silence. A small wave of dizziness rolled through me. The phone lines lit up. My father picked one at random, ready for another friendly caller. A steady male voice cut through. "I am Lieutenant Markson, Medical Corps. I worked with her during the storm. Without her, dozens would have died. You cannot call that running away." The room froze. Even the engineer stopped moving. My father's smile faltered. "Drop the call," the producer hissed, stabbing at the console. The red light blinked in frantic pulses. My father's hand tightened on his mic, a rim of sweat brightening his hairline. The segment ended in a messy fade. I stepped into the corridor, the statements pressed to my chest, heart thudding. My phone buzzed with a new email. "I have the original trust instrument. We need to meet today." It was from the attorney who had handled my mother's affairs. I looked back at the silent on-air sign. He could cut my mic, but he couldn't cut the facts. The lawyer's office smelled of old ink and dust, the kind of place where time seemed to linger. Shelves of dark wood lined the walls, their spines of legal tomes faded with years. Across the heavy desk, the attorney slid a folder toward me. Inside was the original trust document my mother had signed. My eyes traced the clauses until the words felt carved into me. Funds shall not be used for personal promotion or commercial publicity. Every entry I had seen at the credit union, every inflated expense marked as event promotion, stood in direct violation. The lawyer pressed another sheet down, his hand steady despite his age. A bright red stamp cracked against the paper. Probate court, verified. The sound rang like a gavel, final and inescapable. I picked up the pen without hesitation and signed the request for an emergency audit. The attorney nodded. "The court has accepted. Preliminary hearing within 30 days. Relief barely had time to settle before my phone vibrated. A reporter's number flashed on the screen. "We're running a thank you story from Petty Officer Ramirez's family," he said eagerly. "Your name will be in print tomorrow." Hours later, another text from him arrived, shaken and apologetic. "We had to pull your name. Pressure came down from your father's office." The air in my chest tightened. Even now, my father's hand reached through the city, erasing me with a single phone call. Fury surged, but behind it, a harder edge formed. If he wanted to fight with influence and spin, I would fight with law and truth. Posters went up across San Diego. Veterans Day ceremony, USS Midway. My father's name was bold on every flyer. Master of ceremony. That night, a text came through from him. "Don't show up. You'll only embarrass yourself. This is my event." My hand shook as I read it, bile rising in my throat. Not an hour later, my phone rang again. A clipped Navy voice spoke. "Lieutenant Clark, your commendation will be read at the Midway ceremony. Attendance is mandatory. This is not optional, it is your duty." I stared at the wall, pulse hammering. My father thought he was preparing for his grand stage. He didn't know that stage was about to honor me. The next day, the lawyer called once more. His tone was calm, but the words carried weight. "The subpoena for the audit will be served at the ceremony. It's the only way. He's avoided every other attempt." I closed my eyes and saw it. My father standing tall, with the flag behind him, the microphone in his hand, and a court officer stepping forward with the envelope that would strip away the mask. The image burned like prophecy. Everything narrowed to that single day, that single ship. For him, it was supposed to be triumph. For me, it would be truth. Sunday morning broke bright and sharp, the kind of air that carried the weight of ceremony. The deck of the USS Midway gleamed under the sun, lined with flags that snapped and rippled in the wind. Hundreds of veterans and families crowded together, their chatter low and reverent as the Navy band tuned up. At the front stood my father, dressed in a pressed gray suit, his hair combed to a sheen, gripping the microphone as though it were a scepter. His smile was wide, triumphant, a man convinced the day belonged to him. He raised his arms to quiet the crowd. "Today we honor those who have truly sacrificed for this country," he said, his voice booming through the speakers. The words carried a pointed edge, an insinuation. I felt it slice toward me like a blade. From the audience, I shifted in my seat, my service dress blue uniform stiff across my shoulders, my pulse drumming in my ears, my hands clenched into fists inside white gloves. Every nerve in me screamed to stand tall, but I forced myself to stay rooted, waiting. Then I saw it. His subtle gesture to the security guards stationed nearby. A flick of the wrist, a nod toward me. My father's signal was clear. Keep her in place. Keep her from ruining my show. But the show was never his. The ceremony director stepped forward, and suddenly my father's microphone cut silent. His lips moved, but no sound came. Another voice rose, strong and official, carried across the deck. The United States Navy proudly recognizes Lieutenant Odessa Clark for distinguished service. The world stilled. Rows of sailors and officers snapped to attention, hands lifting in perfect unison. The sound of heels striking steel rang like thunder, a chorus of respect that swallowed the harbor. I rose as the salute swept across the deck. The crowd hushed, breath caught in awe. My father turned, still clutching his useless microphone, his face drained of color. For once, he had no words. The voice that filled the air was not his. It was mine, carried by the Navy, by truth, by honor. And in that silence, I knew he could never mute me again. When the final note of the anthem faded and the salute was lowered, I stepped forward. The deck was warm under my shoes, the morning sun burning across my shoulders, glinting off the silver buttons of my service dress blue. Conversations hushed. Hundreds of eyes followed me as I moved to the center of the platform. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "There are 3 things you should know," I said, my words carried clean by the ceremony microphone. First, the trust that bears my mother's name explicitly forbids using its funds for personal promotion or publicity. Second, the financial records show my father approved withdrawals for exactly that purpose. And third, the probate court has already scheduled a hearing. A ripple of unease broke through the crowd. Donors exchanged sharp glances, and I caught one man shaking his head in disbelief. A woman who had once praised my father pressed her lips together, her eyes narrowing. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then the shuffle of footsteps cut through. An officer from the court walked steadily across the deck, a thick brown envelope in hand. He stopped in front of my father and extended it. My father reached out, but his fingers trembled so violently that the microphone slipped from his grip. It clattered onto the steel deck with a hollow clang that seemed to echo for miles. Gasps rippled outward, then silence. An absolute silence that stripped him of every ounce of authority he had clung to. The board of trustees gathered in a knot near the podium. Murmurs, nods, quick calculations. Within minutes, a decision was made. My father was suspended as trustee effective immediately. Until the hearing, control would be shared between me and Reverend Matthews, a man known in the community for his quiet integrity. I stood still, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. The truth had spoken, and it hadn't needed to shout. A few weeks later, I found myself standing in a modest classroom at a community college by the shore. The air smelled faintly of chalk and old linoleum, and the desks were scratched from years of restless students. But the eyes that looked back at me were alive, eager, and full of the same hope my mother once carried. In my hand was the first check I had signed since regaining control of the scholarship fund. My pen had left my mother's name steady and unbroken across the line. I walked to the front row, where a girl no older than 19 sat twisting her calloused hands together. Her jacket was worn thin, and the cuffs were stained with oil from the boatyard where she worked nights. I placed the envelope in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, and her lips parted in disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you, ma'am. Now I can keep going. Now I can stay in school." The room blurred for a moment, and I blinked hard. I thought of the letter I had carried in my pocket all those weeks, my mother's handwriting fading, but her words still cutting clear. "Don't let them silence you. The fund is meant to give voice to the children who need to be heard." Outside, gulls wheeled above the coast, their cries sharp against the wind. I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my phone. My father's number glowed on the screen. I hesitated only a moment before leaving a message. "Dad, I'm willing to talk when you're willing to be honest. Not before." I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. As I walked across the campus courtyard, the laughter of students floated in the air. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. For so long, I had believed my worth was something to be granted or withheld by my father. Now I knew the truth. My voice didn't need his approval. It had already proven its strength, in law, in service, and in the lives it would continue to touch. It belonged not to him, but to me. And it would carry on, nourished by truth, discipline, and the quiet power of service.